Today, we're diving deep into the wild world of the human mind with a rundown of some of the most fascinating and sometimes downright bizarre mental and neurological disorders out there. Schizophrenia. First up, schizophrenia, a heavy hitter in the mental health world. This severe disorder messes with how you think, feel, and act. Picture this. About 1% of the global population, roughly 80 million people, deal with it, according to the World Health Organization. That's like the entire population of Germany hearing voices or seeing things that aren't there. Hallucinations are a hallmark. Maybe it's a voice telling you the world's ending, or shadowy figures lurking in your room. Then there are delusions, false beliefs like thinking you're a secret agent being hunted by the CIA. Disorganized thinking can turn your speech into a jumbled mess, and flat emotions might leave you feeling like a robot. Science says it's a mix of genetics, like a 50% risk if your identical twin has it, and brain chemistry gone haywire, especially with dopamine levels. Treatment? Antipsychotic meds help 70 to 80% of patients manage symptoms, per the National Institute of Mental Health, paired with therapy and support. I read about this guy, John Nash, A Beautiful Mind mathematician, who fought schizophrenia and still won a Nobel Prize. Wild, right? ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This neurodevelopmental condition hits around 5% of kids worldwide and 2.5% of adults, says the American Psychiatric Association. That's millions of people struggling to focus or sit still. Kids with ADHD might zone out during class, forget homework, or blurt out answers. Adults? They're late to meetings or impulse buying random junk online. Hyperactivity shows up as fidgeting, like tapping a pen nonstop, or talking over everyone. Brain scans show ADHD folks have lower activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part that keeps you on task. Stimulant meds like Ritalin boost dopamine and help 70% of cases, while behavioral therapy teaches coping tricks. Think of Elon Musk. He's hinted at ADHD and still runs like 5 companies. Focus might be tough, but the energy? Unmatched. Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Imagine looking at your hand and it suddenly seems the size of a watermelon, or your room feels like a dollhouse. This neurological oddity screws with perception, often tied to migraines, which hit 15% of people, or infections like Epstein-Barr. A 2016 study in neurology found it's likely caused by funky blood flow in the brain's visual areas. Some folks even feel time slows down or speeds up. Super trippy. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, affects about 2 to 3% of people, over 200 million globally. It's all about obsessions, intrusive thoughts like, did I lock the door? And compulsions, like checking it 20 times. The National Institute of Mental Health says 50% of cases are severe, tanking daily life. Brain imaging shows overactive loops in the basal ganglia, driving that urge to repeat. Take Howie Mandel. He's been open about his OCD, washing his hands raw over contamination fears. Jerusalem syndrome. Ever heard of Jerusalem syndrome? This rare psychological glitch hits some tourists in Jerusalem. About 100 cases a year, per Israeli studies. The city's religious vibe triggers intense delusions, like thinking you're Jesus or Mary. One guy in 1999 tried to split the Red Sea at a hotel pool. It's not full-on psychosis usually, just a temporary break, often fading after leaving the city. Social anxiety disorder cripples about 7% of people, 15 million in the US alone. It's not just shyness, it's paralyzing fear of judgment. Public speaking? Nope. Parties? Hard pass. Your amygdala, the brain's fear center, goes into overdrive per a 2020 Nature study. Therapy like CBT helps 75% of folks, and meds like beta blockers calm the physical shakes. I saw a story about a woman who avoided her own wedding reception. Imagine missing your big day over that dread. Bipolar disorder is a roller coaster. 2.8% of US adults ride it, says the NIMH. Depressive lows mean weeks of exhaustion and despair. 50% of patients attempt suicide at some point. Then mania flips the script. Sleepless nights, grand plans, maybe blowing your savings on a whim. Carrie Fisher owned it. She channeled that energy into Star Wars in her books. Mood stabilizers like lithium cut episode frequency by 60%, paired with therapy. It's lifelong, but you can tame it. Alien hand syndrome is straight out of a sci-fi flick. One hand acts on its own, grabbing stuff or undoing buttons, while you're like, stop it. It's rare, tied to brain injuries or strokes splitting the brain's control, per a 2018 Journal of Neurology report. One patient's hand kept tossing her popcorn away during movies. No cure, but therapy helps you adapt, like training it to chill. Agoraphobia locks about 1.7% of people indoors, terrified of crowds or open spaces. Panic attacks hit 80% of cases, says the Anxiety and Depression Association. Think packed subways or wide fields. Your brain screams, no escape. Therapy, like exposure, cuts fear by 70%, sometimes with meds. I read about a guy who hadn't left his apartment in 5 years. Crazy how fear can shrink your world. Hypersexual disorder's tricky. 5 to 6% of people might wrestle with it, though it's debated as a diagnosis. It's relentless sexual urges tanking your life. Think hours on porn or risky hookups. A 2021 Journal of Behavioral Addiction study links it to dopamine spikes and trauma. Jumping Frenchmen of Maine is bonkers, a startle disorder from 19th century lumberjacks. A loud noise. You jump, yell, or copy someone's move like a human puppet. Maybe 50 cases ever recorded, tied to genetics and stress, per Brain Journal. No fix, just avoiding triggers. Imagine dropping a saw and flailing like a cartoon. That's the vibe. Paris syndrome. Paris syndrome hits starry-eyed tourists, 20 to 30 Japanese visitors a year, says a 2015 psychiatry report. They expect romance, get gritty reality, and snap. Hallucinations or panic set in. Culture shock plus jet lag, boom. Most recover with rest, but some need a doctor. Paris is stunning, but it's not a fairy tale. Piblokto, or Arctic hysteria, grips Inuit communities. Think screaming or stripping naked in minus 40 degrees Celsius cold. Rare, maybe a dozen cases studied, linked to vitamin D crashes and isolation, per Arctic anthropology. It fades after a meltdown like a reset. The Arctic's brutal, and this shows it. Wendigo Psychosis is dark. Some Algonquian tribes feared turning into flesh-craving monsters during famines. Historical accounts, like a 1907 execution of a Wendigo, hint at psychosis fueled by starvation and myth. Super rare, but chilling proof of culture shaping madness. Lastly, narcissistic personality disorder. 1% of people, but 6% in leadership roles, says Psychology Today. Grandiose, needy, zero empathy. Think constant selfies and tantrums. Therapy's tough. Only 40% stick with it, but it can soften the edges. Ever met someone who thinks they're God's gift?
Only 1% of viewers will be able to subscribe to my channel and like this video before it ends. 1, 2, 3.